Okay. Hi, Danielle. How are you?
Hi, Douglas. Really nice to meet you over Skype here. What a treat to be on your show.
Well, thank you for coming on. It's my pleasure to have you here. Where are you exactly?
So I'm located in Toronto, Canada, in this wonderful city of ours. Little cold today, but still really a gorgeous city to live in.
Okay, but you're originally from South Africa, is that
So
correct?
originally South African. Yes, that's the accent.
Okay. Right. How long have you been in Canada?
So I grew up in South Africa and I studied my undergraduate and then I did a graduate master's in brain injury. And then in my 20s, married to Stephen, we immigrated to Toronto. So we were young adults when we came to live here. So we've been here many, many, many years.
Okay, so what is your line of work exactly?
So I was a speech pathologist working in a acute care hospital in neurosurgery, spinal, brain injury, trauma. And I did that for well over 20 years. And then I sort of moved into health and fitness and studied Pilates, personal training, ballet, barre training, and corrective exercise. So I did a changeover in my career and have a studio teaching movement.
It almost seems a little bit fortuitous based on this book. I Married a Thrill Seeker. This is a story of your husband deciding to take a motorcycle trip across Canada and getting into an accident. Is that basically it?
That's correct. This was not his first trip. This was his second trip traveling from Toronto through North America, through British Columbia, Yukon, and then the Pot of Gold to Alaska. And then on his return trip, this current time is when he was driving on a very desolate, underused gravel road at dusk in the rain. And he hit a pothole and he had a accident. The bike flew up in the air. He flew up in the air. He landed on the road, breaking both his spine and damaging his heart. And the bike landed about 60 feet in thick bush.
Was he alone?
He was alone. He was a solo rider. He did have friends where he did shorter trips. He would go down to the US, to South Dakota, to the Tail of the Dragon, all over. He did a lot of what he called these iron butt trips around the Great Lakes. But when he did his big trips, he went solo. He liked to be on his own time. He liked to discover the wilderness on his own, and he likes to go at his own speed and didn't want to be accountable to anyone.
Was there anybody around when he had his accident?
So no, and I'll share with you a little bit of one of the reasons that I wrote the story. Some very miraculous things happened on the roadside. So this was an underused gravel highway, and there were no cars, structures, people for hundreds of miles. And that obviously was what intrigued him and challenged him, because then he could be closer to seeing the grizzly bears and traveling on a more challenging road. So when he had this accident, he was alone and he hadn't seen any vehicle for hours. But the fortunate thing, and he was always smart in his travels, even though he took risks, he had with him what's called a spot. And a spot is a satellite, and I'll just show it to you because I happen to have it here. It's like a walkie-talkie, and it has three functions. It notifies me of where he's at, gives me coordinates at the end of the day. It also enables his fellow bikers and adventure friends to follow his trip on a website. But the most important thing is that it has an emergency button that connected to an emergency response center in Texas. The crazy thing about this trip is he attached the spot to his handlebars, and that's a lesson learned. You really should have it on your body. So when the bike flies up in the air and lands in this very thick bush, at least 60 feet away, he's now on the road, immobile because he's broken his spine. The bike breaks, scatters contents all around it. And the spot breaks off this metal bracket, this big sort of walkie-talkie box, and miraculously flies up in the air 60 feet and lands within his reach, because remember, he can't move. And when you think of that, that's like winning the lottery of life. This thing could have fallen any which way around the bike, could have stayed on the bike, and not even the distance of Stephen. And it was almost like he was the target. And I mean, it's just incredible and unexplainable how this landed in his reach. So he pressed it, not thinking that because he was so in such a rural area that it would actually work, but it did. They picked up the call response.
Okay, so it's like a GPS, but
exactly,
it has an emergency function on it.
Yeah, and the beauty of it is it's not like a phone battery which runs out. It has an extended life, the battery of it.
Okay, so how long did it take for help to arrive where he was?
So when we got the call, because I was up north at our family cottage, they said they were hours away from them because they called not only the paramedics, but our Canadian police, the RCMP. But Steve, we always say he has 9 lives plus. He was so fortunate that a trucker who was not meant to be on the road at that time, he always followed his route and his time, got distracted meeting a friend in a small town called Watson Lake. And this was very unusual for him to go off his timeline. And so he got delayed. And if he hadn't, they would have crossed paths on the road, both of them driving. But this trucker decided to stay, have lunch, meet his friend, and then head on home to a small town called Faro. And he found Steve an hour and a half later lying on the road. So Frank, the trucker, was our hero too. And it was a very difficult job to get Steve into his rig because he didn't want to leave Steve there, and his radio reception wasn't good enough to call for help, and they didn't think that the spot would have worked. So he said, if I leave you here at dusk, this is grizzly bear territory, you may not make the night. So they risked moving someone with a spinal injury into his rig, which was an onerous task.
So the truck driver was not alerted by the device?
No, it was pure coincidence and timing. And we always say that time and place brought Steve and Frank together, because it shouldn't have really happened if he stuck to his regular schedule.
Were you opposed to him going on this motorbike trip?
Yes, yes, yes. I am so risk adverse. I am so moderate. I am definitely not up for these kind of challenges. And Steve is a sensation seeker, and he likes challenges. He likes risks. He was an ultramarathon runner, long distance cyclist, and he's always up for a challenge, seeking these like new and exciting sensations. And so we actually went for therapy prior to this last trip, hoping that I was obviously hoping that he would understand my point of view. And the therapist said, you know, Steve needs to be more empathetic and show compassion for my anxiety, but I also need to validate and support him on his adventures. And of course, we didn't come to a great agreement. And in hindsight, it wasn't a great trip for him to take, because it altered our lives forever.
Did you know this about him before you got married?
Yes, in a weird way. I come from a very moderate way of thinking. We had rules in our house about, you know, speed, drinking, driving, all those kind of safety rules. And when I met Stephen, I was writing exams, and I said, you know, I can't go out on it. Well, I didn't meet him, it was over the phone. I can't go out with you. I'm studying for exams. I was conscientious, just come out of a relationship. And I think he was a little bit surprised that I'd said no. And I sort of made some inquiries about him and was told, no, he's not your type. He's too wild, too mischievous for you. And then a couple of weeks later, he called me back and he said, you know, I thought I'd give you a second chance. And I was, well, this guy is a little cocky, but you know what, maybe I'm up for the challenge. So obviously I I knew he was a risk-taking individual who liked challenges. And the first time he came to my home and met my parents, he came on his scrambler bike, and my parents went to him and the bike. And I think out of respect to wanting to continue the relationship and my parents, he sold his scrambler motorbike.
So how long have you been married? You're still married?
We're still, believe it or not, we're still married. We've been married a long time. We have 2 grown children who are now 28 and 31, and we got married 4 years before then.
Let me back up just a moment. How did you find out that he had been injured on this motorbike trip?
Yeah, so I was enjoying some relaxing time. My children were away working at a summer camp in what's called Muskoka, Northern Ontario, which they did for the summers, and we were up at our family cottage. And I was watching a movie, relaxing, and I get this phone call thinking that's probably Stephen saying goodnight for the night. But it was the Texas Response Center saying, "Are you Danielle Kaplan? We've received 2 emergency calls from the spot. What do we do? Do we call the paramedics and RCMP?" And I said, "Did the coordinates move?" And they said, "Not for 20 minutes. And I said, "Yep, call for help." And they said, "Unfortunately, he's so rural where he is, it's going to take them hours to find him."
So what did you do?
So I am amazingly good in crisis, and I calmly followed the route with them. We packed up our cottage. My parents were with me. We drove back to Toronto. I was so concerned about my parents and how they would cope. At this point, we didn't know if Stephen was actually alive or what had happened to him. And amazingly, that Frank found him and then started heading to a very small nursing clinic in the Yukon, in an area called Ross River. And the RCMP were actually going the other direction and met them along the way. And I got a call from one of the police officers on satellite to say, "We found your husband. He can barely talk, he can't move. He just wants to let you know he's okay."
So from Toronto, you would have had to fly up, or that's a long way.
That very day we get home, we in contact with the Ross River Clinic with the nursing staff. They are now taking him via ambulance to a small town, Faro, where a medevac plane picked him up and flew him to Whitehorse, which was the closest emergency department that had radiological services, so they could x-ray his spine. I then am in contact with them and the emergency physician, and because I was in a unique position, I had knowledge of this whole area. I had worked it for many years. They told me exactly what had happened, and I said, "Please send him to Toronto." And they said, "No, he's too fragile, too vulnerable. We need to get him to the closest hospital," which they were deciding between Calgary and Vancouver, and thank goodness they medevaced him on another flight to Vancouver General Hospital, because not only was the medical care beyond brilliant, but they had machinery called ECMO, which unfortunately Stephen required. After his spine surgery, he went into complete lung, kidney, liver, and heart failure. Nothing was functioning, and they had to put him on this, what they call this extracorporeal membranous oxygenation equipment, just to raise his heart and lungs. But they said he's not going to make the night.
He's all right now?
He is, we laugh, my kids and I. He has 9 lives. He has the luck of the devil. He is a determined man, and he worked very hard, and we all did. And he rose so high because initially he had cognitive difficulties, he had hallucinations, delirium, post-traumatic stress disorder, everything. I mean, he was as sick as one could be. We never thought he'd get off ECMO and off ventilation and off dialysis and so on and so on and so on with cognitive. He rose so high to be the COO of a global skincare company with well over 400 employees, and he was their wonderful leader in the sense that he, he fought for them for fairness, integrity, and everyone loved him. He just retired, which everyone's most surprised at, because Steve is an extreme. He is extreme at everything he does. So we never thought that day would come. But he just said, yep, time to sit back and chill a little bit.
Okay. We do have to wind this up. We are out of time.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on. The book is called I Married a Thrill Seeker. My guest is Danielle Kaplan. Do you have a website that you want to give out?
Yes, the website is fascinating because it has 4 photo galleries of his trip and all other things. And it's www.imarriedathrillseeker.com.
All right.
Or you can go daniellekaplan.ca. And the book is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Indigo in Canada, and yeah, all over.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your story, and best of luck with the book.
Thank you.
As well.
Douglas, thank you. What a treat to speak with you.